Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the reading of tributes of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. I am Aric Chen, President of the Academy. Since 1903, the Academy has presented tributes to members who have passed away. These are typically read at our headquarters building in New York City before our spring and fall dinners. For the past year, however, because of the pandemic, we've been presenting tributes virtually as live recordings on Zoom. Tonight, we will be reading tributes to 4 Academy members: the architects and longtime professional partners, Henry N. Cobb and I.M. Pei; the writer, Toni Morrison; and the composer, Charles Wuorinen. These are being recorded and will be posted to our website in a few days. First of all, to begin, architects Merrill, Elam, and Mack Scogin will read the tribute to Harry N. Cobb.
Thank you. There are many ways we might pay tribute to Harry Cobb. His contributions to architecture and the arts are significant. As an educator, as a scholar, as an advocate for the arts, as an accomplished writer and author, as an intellectual provocateur, as a model of ethical practice, and as a generous and gentle mentor, colleague, and friend in architecture. But tonight we pay tribute to Harry Cobb, the architect, the maker of beautiful and often radical architecture. Harry said of himself that he did not have it in the fingers. He attributed that quality to Corbusier and Lutyens. He would declare that he did not have the creative imagination of the poet or the artist, that he had to be provoked by pragmatics, the program, the place, the restraints. But I say Harry relished these aspects of architecture because he was curious and open and positive about the world around him. For me, the pages 2 and 3 of Harry's 2018 Words and Works, Scenes from a Life in Architecture, dispel this self-imposed notion of not having it in the fingers. Pages 2 and 3 show Harry's childhood poster color painting of Piazza San Marco, painted after returning from travels with his mother. The painting reveals the spatial memory and the eye of the future architect. With a child's hand, he captures the essence of Piazza San Marco, the layers, the textures, the architectural fabric, the colors and space. It is no small matter that in simple child strokes, Harry tells us just enough. He does not bore us with hyperrealism or photo exactness. He lets us wonder what exactly the weather was at that moment when whitecaps appeared on the canal. What is the exact relationship of the stacked columns of the Doge's palace? Are they really stacked? What is the materiality of the Campanile or St. Mark's Basilica? I would like to posit that Harry Cobb's works, onward from this childhood painting, continue to allow the mind to wander and speculate. There is always a momentary fixity that sets up both the work and the context in motion for Harry, making new realities. It is an architectural magic act of the first magnitude. Harry has left us the gift of a long list of provocative architectures.
The Boston Federal Courthouse was the first to finally and rightfully extrovert America's justice system opening up and orienting its process to the hands and hearts of the public who made it and to whom it serves, creating arguably one of the most radical architectures of our time without sacrificing the integrity of the institutional dignity it represents. In doing so, Harry was instrumental in establishing new standards of creative expectations for the design of one of our society's most important building types. Expectations that many architects since have greatly benefited from, including Merrill and myself.
In Words and Works, Harry writes the following: the new federal courthouse should convey in every aspect of its design those qualities, probity, permanence, clarity, restraint, that are embodied in the administration of justice. Another quality that I wish to see in its architecture cannot be well expressed in words. It must be demonstrated in stone. But an analogy that may be relevant is evidence in the portraits that adorn the walls of the present First Circuit courtroom. As paintings, all are competent, but few are interesting. The only one, Gardner Cox's painting of Judge Bailey Aldrich, stands out as immediately engaging. I have never met Judge Aldrich, but this portrait makes me want to meet him. It is suggestive in the best sense of the word. That is to say, it stimulates one's interest in the person portrayed and engenders respect for his character and for the quality of his mind. What the portrait does for the judge, the new federal courthouse must do for justice. How wonderfully radical it was for Harry and the senior judges collectively to make this association, to transpose from a modest portrait a premise for the reinterpretation of what a contemporary courthouse can be.
A quote from my tribute to Harry at the 2015 Architectural League President's Medal event. Harry, last Thursday, I once again flew into Boston and declared your John Hancock building one of the best of all time. It was at that extraordinary moment of the day when the sun was low in the sky, a fluorescent red-orange ball is simultaneously seared into the vertical fold of the Hancock, transforming the building into a pencil-thin flame rising above the skyline of Boston. Two equal phenomena, a magic ball and a magic line, making one fleeting moment when the world is rendered crystal clear. Every time I see this, I'm reminded that's all an architect ever has to do in her or his lifetime in architecture. Just make one of those, just one magnificent moment of clarity that erases differences, restores hope, and piques the imagination of mankind. Genuine eloquence in architecture is rare. It's not that hard to create a screaming building that has nothing to say. You have shown us how to make silent architecture that suspends judgment and sustains a discourse. Architecture at once all about place and against place. An architecture that solves problems with elegant ease while raising unanswerable yet compelling questions originating from and rooted within disciplinary substance. Harry was often used the pregnant pause as a means to search for exactly the right word. You soon learn not to try to offer a suggestion because it would be ignored. He alone could fill in the blank. Conversations with Harry Cobb were never finished and never will be. For those of us who had the privilege of sharing his profoundly generous mind of imagination and intellect, always knew he could trust Harry for genuine moments of pure inspiration, provocative moments of suspension where our original ideas of liberation could be examined and celebrated as such, but never without substantive evidence. This is the genius of Harry's world in architecture, and indeed its defining characteristics. Profoundly declared and open for interpretation, said but mute, screaming but silent, requiring interpretation, but as ever suspended in conversation.
I would also note that Harry's deep generosity and sense of service led him to act as the president of the Academy and to serve on the board. So thank you, Mack and Merrill. The writer, Jesmyn Ward, will read the tribute to the stellar Toni Morrison.
In the beginning, we were stolen. We were stolen from myriad lands, lands verdant with green, lands spread with sere plains, lands undulating with desert. We were stolen as we walked to our well. We were stolen from our gardens. We were stolen from our weaving. We were stolen from our mother's breasts, our father's hands, our grandmother's lap. We were stolen and ferreted here. We were stolen from our freedom, pared down to parts and taken, our names vanished, reduced to one prime hand, one lady's maid, one cook, one seamstress, our ease of walking leashed, our feet no longer free to lead us where we willed, chained to the work, our will and agency stolen, bound our tongues, garbled our languages, subverted our speech. There were some things they could not steal. They thought us not human, so they tried to make us not human. But we did not submit. We resisted. We learned new languages. They stole our old songs, but still we sang new ones. We sang even as we toiled. We anchored them with our anger, our sorrow, our need to be free. Sometimes that singing felt like freedom. They stole our stories, but we told new ones, even as we toiled. We anchored them with our wit, our furtive joy, our defiant love. Sometimes telling those stories seemed a doorway to freedom. Even after the wars, the proclamations that decreed chattel slavery was at an end, there was still theft, redlining, lynching, Jim Crow, bleach in swimming pools, bombed out cities. They still tried, in account after account, to reduce us to who and what they thought we were, in book after book, in film after film, slander after slander. A portly, kerchiefed mammy, an obsequious, dancing, devoted, enslaved man, a savage freedman, reeling from his broken chains, attacking Scarlett O'Hara's carriage. They tried to render us invisible, even to ourselves, but yet we sang. We lifted our voices and ululated to the sky. We scribbled poetry, devoured books. Oracles ascended. We wandering children found them in our childhood, the prophets who called to us, their voices high in the desert of the self, their voices loud and carrying on the wind as they sang us to ourselves, as they brought us back to ourselves, as they sang of rivers, of invisible men, of people with the gift of flight. But beneath the stories, the defiant whisper, the oracles hummed this: we are not slovenly, we are not violent, we are not animals, we are not our trauma, we are more and more and more and more. Toni Morrison, regal and wreathed in smoke and flame, found us in the desert of the self. She, profound, far-seeing, bold, she of the indomitable octave. We wandering children heard Toni Morrison's voice, and she saved us. There was tenderness in her song, each sentence an embrace, evident in how she sang of her characters as they argued and made love and killed and cared for children and fed strangers, how it shone in her patience, her presence, and her attention. Something in that absolute narrative presence, in her sure voice, communicated this: you are worthy to be seen. You are worthy to be heard. You are worthy to be sat with, to be walked beside. Even in your quietest moments, you are worthy of witness. This was the melody beneath her words. We heard it. We understood. We wandering children looked blindly in the dry distance, enveloped by her voice, and we knew it was possible to write with such careful love. And we also knew it was possible to be loved, that we, every one of us, were worthy of witness to. We knew that there was more than this desert, that Morrison's stories, her love, her regard was an oasis. Here was life in defiance of all we'd lost to the thieves. Here we were, here we are. Toni Morrison wrote to us and again, exhorting us of our beauty, making us grapple with our pain, reaffirming our humanity. Her every word a caress, her every sentence an embrace, her every paragraph a cupping of her hands around our faces that said, I know you, I see you, we are together. She loved us when we prayed and sang and made love and danced. She loved us when we lied, sliced throats, and disowned our children. She loved us at our best and our broken. She called us forth in her pages and made us experience and understand ourselves with kindness, with a deeper knowing of all we had survived, all we had not, all we had made, all we had unmade, all we had become, and all we could be. How she knew us, how she sang us to the world. And now that she is gone, how we weep for our beloved.
Thank you, Jesmyn. Aric Chen, General and Artistic Director of Het Nieuw Institute in Rotterdam, will read the tribute to I Am Pei.
It is a great, though somewhat unexpected privilege to have this opportunity to honor I Am Pei, a man I in fact met only once, which I'll come back to shortly. Now, Pei was of course one of the great architects of the 20th and early 21st centuries, known best for his powerful use of geometry, imbued with studied refinement and civic purpose. Over a career spanning 7 decades, he was the architect of such projects of enduring significance as the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library in Boston and the East Building of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the Grand Louvre in Paris, the Bank of China Tower in Hong Kong, and in later years, the Miho Museum outside Kyoto and the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha. To a child like myself, growing up in Chicago's Hyde Park, he was also the illustrious name behind the University Apartments, that ovoid island of arched concrete that looked like a ship parting the waters of East 55th Street. Indeed, for a designer who sought such clarity and rigorous simplicity through spatial and material form, Pei was many things to many people. Early on, the Bauhaus founder Walter Gropius deemed him one of the best students he'd encountered as dean at Harvard. To Jacqueline Kennedy, the then relatively untested young architect reminded her of her late husband Jack, quote, full of promise, when she commissioned Pei to design the JFK Library. Much has been written about Pei's work and the promise he fulfilled, the considered monumentality of his museums, but also his innovations in housing, urban planning, public space, construction and engineering, and his role in the rise of the American corporate architecture firm, alongside his partners Harry Cobb and James Freed. Of course, success did not always come easily to Pei. The JFK Library, for one, was mired for years in controversy. Before he seduced Paris, he utterly scandalized it with his proposal for a glass pyramid at the Louvre. Pei considered the Fragrant Hill Hotel in Beijing, which was among the first buildings by an international architect in post-reform China, to be one of the most painful experiences of his professional life. One hears stories about Pei himself and his wife Elaine frantically mopping the hotel's floors in a panic as the building's unveiling hour approached. In a time that demanded assimilation, Pei was decisive in calling himself an American architect, as indeed he was. But he also insisted that, quote, a lasting architecture has to have roots, and perhaps it's along these lines that he never lost sight of his own. Born to an elite family in Guangzhou, which was then called Canton, Pei arrived in the US for his studies in 1935 with every intention of returning to China afterwards. But war and history got in the way. Still, as the Chinese immigrant moored himself against the odds within the American establishment, his engagement with China, or rather the multiple Chinas at the time, eventually resumed. First with projects on the nationalist island of Taiwan, and as it began opening up after 1978 in the People's Republic. Not long after, Pei began work on the Bank of China Tower in Hong Kong, just as the then British colony was preparing its return to the mainland. Having navigated the prejudices of his adopted country, Pei skillfully juggled the intricacies of his native one. Yet in 1989, in the aftermath of Tiananmen Square, the complexities of being Chinese came to a head with the complexities of being American. At the suggestion of Henry Kissinger, Pei assembled a group of prominent peers and established the Committee of 100 as a voice for Chinese Americans. Outwardly, at least, Pei was decidedly apolitical, something for which he's been occasionally criticized. But for Pei, architecture was life, as he often said, and life perhaps transcends politics. In the current US-China climate of alarming geopolitical rivalry and racist violence at home, we would all do well to not only honor Pei as an architect, but also as a bridge builder and an American as well. I'll end my remarks here by reminding everyone of how famously charming Pei was, with his witty intelligence, round frame eyeglasses, and beaming smile. And that brings me back to my one encounter with him. It was 2013, and Pei was a sprightly 95 years old. I had asked to merely interview him, but against the better judgment of his son Sandy, Pei insisted that we have lunch beforehand at his old haunt, the Gramercy Tavern in Manhattan. Sandy knew that lunch with Pei meant bottomless glasses of wine, and this time was no exception. The interview, of course, suffered a bit as a result, and I don't remember much myself, except that when I asked Pei about his work in Hong Kong, all he wanted to talk about was how good the oysters were there. And in this sense, the interview might be considered a bit of a failure, but true to Pei's reputation, it was a pure pleasure nonetheless. Thank you.
Thank you, Aric, for this description of most incredibly graceful and beautiful man. Composer and Academy member Tobias Picker will read the tribute to Charles Wuorinen. And at the end of the tribute, you will hear a recording of Charles Wuorinen's Grand Bambula for strings.
Charles Wuorinen's recent death from a fall at 82 was untimely and devastating to his husband and partner of 32 years, Howard Stokar, and to musicians everywhere. Charles, who until the age of 6 was not sure whether he wanted to be an astrophysicist or a composer amassed a catalog of nearly 300 works in every genre. He wrote the operas Haroun and the Sea of Stories with James Fenton and Brokeback Mountain with Annie Proulx. In 1970, at 32, Charles was the youngest composer ever to win a Pulitzer Prize for his groundbreaking and timeless full-length, purely electronic work, Times Encomium. He later became one of the first composers to win a MacArthur, the Genius Award, and Charles was, as a matter of fact, a genius. The son of John Wuorinen, chairman of the Columbia University History Department, young Charles was accepted at Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, but his parents were against his leaving New York, and he received his MA from Columbia in 1963. With Harvey Solberger, he founded the Group for Contemporary Music in 1962. The group, as it was known, cultivated a new generation of performers, commissioning and premiering hundreds of works. It was the first contemporary music ensemble based at a university and run by composers. It consisted of the finest musicians in New York, including his longtime friends, the cellist Fred Sherry and the pianist Ursula Oppens. Together, they worked with major composers such as Boulez, Babbitt, Cage, Carter, Copland, Davidovsky, Feldman, Takemitsu, Varese, and Volpe. He premiered many of his own pieces at the group as well, and went on to be championed by Peter Serkin, Oliver Knussen, James Levine, Michael Tilson Thomas, and Peter Martins, who commissioned Charles for 7 ballets for the New York City Ballet. As a conductor and pianist, he appeared with the Cleveland Orchestra, Chicago Symphony, New York Philharmonic, LA Philharmonic, and the San Francisco Symphony. I first met Charles at the scandalous premiere of his Concerto for Amplified Violin and Orchestra, performed by Paul Zukovsky and the Boston Symphony at Tanglewood in the summer of 1972. I was 18, and I thought, through this electric and electrifying music, I was experiencing the very voice of God. Charles became my teacher and mentor that fall. The following summer, he invited me to live in the ground floor apartment of his brownstone on West End Avenue. What followed was a deep friendship of nearly 50 years. Charles Wuorinen was a titan whose music will stand the test of time. It is utterly original and uncompromising. It is a generous music that keeps giving more and more upon repeated hearings. He was also one of the wittiest people I've ever known, a master of wordplay. After the Boston Symphony musicians sat on their hands rather than applaud him for his electric violin concerto, Tanglewood became Wangleturd. He could reduce his friends to uncontrollable laughter with a mere eyebrow raise. Selflessly, he literally taught me how to compose and showed me what it meant to be a composer. I still cannot really see the world without Charles in it any more than I can without my parents. His work was everything to him. The only time I ever saw Charles take a day off was sometime in 1973 when he was simply too hungover to work because the night before was spent at Igor Stravinsky's apartment drinking with Robert Kraft and Stravinsky's widow Vera, who gave Charles the master's deathbed sketches and asked him to make something out of them. These became the basis of his orchestral work, A Reliquary for Igor Stravinsky. In his book, Simple Composition, Charles gave advice to young composers. He wrote, "I would caution the beginning composer against resisting the necessary and healthful discipline that must always be preceded by the acquisition of real skill and understanding. After some decades, an artist may truly discard all method, learn to unlearn his learning, and function fully in the direct interplay between his own intuition and the nature of the world at large. The seductive pablum of self-expression, merchandised to those who have yet no self to express, is the most dangerous and destructive idea to corrupt a young composer. Remember always that freedom can be had only if it is earned. Freedom means nothing unless there are coordinates, fixed and clear, whose very immobility allows the one who is free to measure the unfetteredness of his flight." Philip Glass once told me there must always be a curmudgeon composer in our midst. And Charles, he said, is just so good at it. Charles Wuorinen once wrote, "My career in composition is directed toward integrating myself into my work and my work into the world. so that both of us can disappear together. He was one of those people who are so vital that they don't really die until we do. And I will miss Charles deeply every day I have left on this earth.
Thank you, Tobias. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight for our reading of tributes. We hope that you will join us for future tribute programs, which will continue this fall. The world is opening up, and we are all walking forward slowly. Stay well. Night.